First and foremost, I want to thank you guys for coming out. I hope that you were able to attend the first part of this, which was at noon with a panel of professors. And this event could not have been put on without the Dean of Students Office in the law school, so definitely shout out and thank you to them. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Today, Mr. Joseph Doyle has graciously come to speak with us about his experience as Eric Garner's public defender, as well as just his day-to-day as a public defender in New York, Staten Island specifically. And so the way that this is going to work is he's going to give a presentation, and then you guys are going to be able to ask him questions afterwards. And so Mr. Joseph Doyle graduated from UVA in 2010, and he worked for Sidley Austin for a little over a year before joining Legal Aid. He also worked at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office right after law school as a deferred associate, and he had been representing Eric Garner for about a year before he was killed. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Joseph Doyle.
Okay, is this on? Great. Hi, my name is Joe Doyle. Like Ruby said, I'm an attorney with Legal Aid Society in Staten Island, New York. First of all, I'd like to thank Ruby for inviting me to speak. I'd like to thank BALSA and all the other student organizations that put this together. When Ruby reached out to me, I was really honored to actually be asked to come out here and talk about my experience. At the same time, my feelings on this are a little bit complicated because there's really only one reason I'm here to talk, and it's because a client of mine got killed. And I also have somewhat complicated feelings on this because, like I said, I've actually been doing this for a couple of years. I'm not that far out of law school. And so, I don't have the same level of experience that, a lot of other people you might talk to would have. But at the same time, I think what I can do and what I like to do is talk a little bit about what my experience was like representing Mr. Garner and what my experience was like representing people charged with predominantly low-level crimes in New York City and Staten Island in particular, and then hopefully to discuss how those experiences relate to some of the larger issues that some of the professors are talking about today. I started representing Mr. Garner, this point was probably about a year and a half ago. I think it was July 2013. Still relatively new. And I met him the way I meet all my clients, which I met him in Staten Island Criminal Court. The Staten Island Criminal Court is a small, old, decrepit courthouse in Staten Island. It's got these two court parts, 2 judges, and 1,000 DAs. It's got a very small town feel to it. Like when I first started, the DAs, senior attorney was like, yeah, no, it's just like Mayberry, but with a pill problem. And that's kind of what Staten Island Criminal Court ends up looking like. I met Mr. Garner in the same way that I meet all my clients, which is through arraignments. And I don't know if anybody here has ever worked at a public defender's office, or hopefully you've never had any experience getting arrested. But the way it works, at least in Staten Island, is this. You're out on the street one night, something happens, or whatever, and you end up in cuffs. You end up getting brought to one precinct for processing, you get brought to the other precinct, which is essentially central booking for interrogations or beating or whatever it is they do, and then eventually get held overnight and brought to criminal court the next day. And you sit all day in this, and not to be too dramatic about it, but you sit in a cage. It's a pen, it's a cell, and you sit with the 20 other dudes who just got arrested that night, and nobody's had any sleep, and everybody's in a bad mood. And you sit there for the better part of the day while upstairs, I'm sitting around waiting for you to get brought up. And while I'm doing that, I'm reading through a court file. What this is going to have what's called a complaint, which is what the DAs are saying, all the terrible things you did. And it's going to have a rap sheet, which is say all the terrible things they're saying you did in the past. And it's going to have, you ever been convicted of something, you ever have any warrant history, whatever. And so this is what I'm reviewing before I even meet the client. And at the same time, I'm going to talk to the DA. I'm going to go over and say, were you guys trying to make an offer that's going to make this case end today? Are you going to be asking for bail? And bail, which, you guys probably have a sense of this, bail is the thing that if the DAs want it and the judge sets it, and you don't have any money, then you're not going home that night. You're going to Rikers Island. And I'll tell you, I don't want to misdemeanors, it's usually not a whole lot of bail money. It's about like $1,000, $1,500, the outside maybe $2,500. And so, and from a lot of my clients, like, they don't have that. So if bail's getting set, for the most part, like I said, you're not going home. And so my job in arraignments is your lawyer. The guy's going to get assigned to you if you've been arrested. In all likelihood, I'll be assigned to you if you've been arrested. My job is to get you home. That's the number one thing in arraignments that I'm looking to do. For some people, they're just going to let them out, and then we're going to worry about fighting the case. But for other people, my job is to say, look, it was the quickest way you're getting outside. And for certain people, and look, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not happy about this. But for certain people, the reality of the situation is sometimes you're going to be taking a plea. And because what's going to happen is they're going to say, we want him to do, whatever, 7 days jail, 10 days jail, something like that. Something not extravagant, but nothing I'd want to do myself. And it might make sense for you to take that deal because, look, if you don't take it, by the time the court puts you on the calendar again, you'll already have done that time. So you're going to end up staying in longer if you can't make bail just to fight your case. And this is something I'm looking at while you're sitting downstairs wondering whether you're going to get to go home tonight. I'm looking at this file and trying to figure out, okay, is that the situation this person's going to be in? Well, back in July 2013, whatever it was, I was a little worried that that's the situation Mr. Garner was going to be in. It's all public information at this point. Like, he'd been in the system before, and I'll tell you, he did not have the 30 convictions that, you've probably heard, after Mr. Garner got killed, the police tried to kind of dirty him up a little bit, say, oh, this guy's been arrested 30 times. I don't know, maybe he was arrested 30 times. He didn't have that many convictions on his record. So I don't know what those other arrests were, but I'm just going to say they don't show up on his rap sheets. They're dismissed in his favor, perhaps. I have no idea. I don't have any information about that. But in any case, the fact is the guy had been in the system. And so the judge was probably going to set bail, and I don't know if he was going to be able to make bail. So I go back, and I have this conversation with him. I do the thing I do with all my clients. Hi, my name is Doyle. I'm an attorney with the Legal Aid Society. I've been assigned to represent you today. And we talk a little about the case. And, you're going to be able to make bail. Anybody on bail? No, I need to hope he's got bail money for me. And with Mr. Garner, we talked about the charges. And I'm not going to get into all the details of what they were, but I'm just going to leave you with this. They were trumped up. I'm not going to say there's nothing that they couldn't make stick at trial, but I will say on this first arrest, there were a number of charges that were totally trumped up and they weren't going to make stick at trial, and Mr. Garner knew. And Mr. Garner was saying at the time, look, they're harassing me. These cops know me. They pulled me over for no reason. I didn't do this stuff they're saying I did, and I'm not pleading guilty. And I said, look, if you don't know if you can make bail, you're taking some risks. But it was a risk he wanted to take, and he did. And he didn't plead guilty, and he luckily he was able to make bail. He had some family or somebody who could raise some money for him, and he got out. So we ended up fighting the case for a little bit. And fighting the case, when you're out, adjournments take forever, which is terrible. So you have a criminal, I think if you ever had a criminal case hanging over your head, the thing is you want finality, and it doesn't come in the criminal justice system. These things take forever. We adjourned the case, and we got some of the charges dismissed. And what I will say about Mr. Garner is, as a client, he was a great client. He was very respectful. He always called me Mr. Doyle. I always called him Mr. Garner. He was respectful to everybody in the court system that I saw. He was in regular contact. He called me, wanted updates. Like, Mr. Garner, I got no updates. We filed a motion. They responded. I got nothing to say. But he still called. He also called to complain about police harassment. Throughout the course of the representation, which again, it lasted probably about a year, he called to say, these cops are stopping me, they're frisking me, they're trying to see if they make something stick, and they'll frisk him and they'll let him go, they got nothing on him. But it's like they're throwing him up against the wall in front of his grandkids, in front of his children, and he's calling me, he's frustrated about that. And then a couple of times they did try to make something stick, and he did get arrested. He got arrested for a couple of these, what they were saying he was doing at the time, which was selling untaxed cigarettes. Now, I don't know if they have this. I don't know if this is as big a thing in Illinois or wherever you guys are from. In New York, taxes are incredibly high on cigarettes. Not everybody can afford that. So people sell loosies on the street. People buy cigarettes from outside the state where they're cheaper and then sell them for a couple for $1 or whatever. And that's what they were saying they saw Mr. Garner do. And he said, I didn't do it. They're first thing, they're trying to get something to stick, and I didn't do it. I said, all right, we'll try to put the cases. He was very, very angry. And the last time I spoke with him, last time I saw him was in court. It was in court probably, it was July, it was right before, it was last July, it was right before the holidays, it was probably the 2nd or 3rd, and it was in the same Richmond County criminal courthouse. And we were on to see if we were going to have a disposition for his cases. And I'd spoken with the DA, who's, like me, like a kind of new guy, hadn't been doing it that long. And we thought we might have what we call a favorable disposition. Well, what I mean by that is not that it's in any way really favorable. It just means that what they're offering you is this right here, and what you're going to get if you go down to trial is this here, and this is a lot worse than what they're offering you now, and you might want to take this deal. So he and I had a conversation in, there's this little stairwell in court, there's a window ledge, and it's kind of the de facto office of the Legal Aid Society. We don't have an office in that court, so we spend a lot of time talking to our clients. I said, look, this is what we're dealing, you might want to take this deal. He's like, well, do I have to say I'm going to sell them those cigarettes? And I said, yeah, I'm not doing it. I said, okay. I mean, look, outside looking at you all right now, like, none of you guys are in law school right now because you want to stand next to people when they plead guilty. Like, that's not why you go to law school. That's not why I went to law school. So, I mean, there is something that's I'm heartened when somebody says they want to go to trial. That's why I became a lawyer. But you still worry about your clients if they're taking some serious risks. So that was about the 2nd or 3rd, and when we adjourned for trial, and wish we said happy, enjoy your holiday, Mr. Doyle. I said, enjoy your holiday, Mr. Garner. And that was the last time I saw him. It was a couple weeks after that, July 17th, I guess. I think that was what it was. That Mr. Garner was killed. And he got a call that night. I was going to dinner or something. I got a call from my boss saying, I think we got a client. I think a client of ours may have been killed. They didn't release a name at that point, but went through a description. He was kind of a distinct guy, and we're like, all right, I think Mr. Garner got killed by the police. And by the time I got home that night, the video was out. It was all over the internet. I don't know how many of you guys seen the video. I'm assuming a good chunk of you probably have. If you haven't, it's a horrifying video. It's a man getting killed. It's a man getting killed on camera is what it is. And what you see in the video is you see Mr. Garner surrounded by 2 plainclothes police officers, and he got his back to the wall. It's like a beauty splash shot. He's got his back to a wall there. And what they're doing at the time when the video starts filming is they're actually waiting for the uniform patrol to come so they can take him to custody. But he's saying, why are you doing this, man? Why are you stopping me? Why are you harassing me? You always do this. I knew anything wrong. Why are you doing this? And they're not really engaging with him. But at some point, uniform patrol shows up and they go to make the arrest. And he does. He puts up his hands. He tries to resist. I mean, I'm not going to say he resisted arrest, but he definitely put up his hands a little bit. And at that point, Daniel Pantaleo, who's the guy in the green shirt, takes his arm, takes his forearm, puts it up against his neck, and from behind kind of brings him down and shoves him on the ground. And then Mr. Garner's saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. He's doing that, and Pantaleo just puts his hand on Mr. Garner's head, and then Mr. Garner stops speaking, and that's it. That's what happens in the video. So that video came out, and obviously it was all over the news. People really were shocked. Like, how does something like this happen? Why does do things like this happen? And a lot of people are surprised. I'll say the thing that really got me about that video at the time, there were a lot of things that got me about that video. One of them is that wasn't the first video I'd seen of somebody from that precinct beating up somebody on that same street corner. And that wasn't the first video I'd seen that week. There was another video that came out shortly before that. I don't know if you guys heard or saw this video, but Mr. Garner was killed on a Thursday. The Monday before, by just sheer coincidence, I was in arraignments again, and I met a man named Jeffrey Thomas. I'll represent Mr. Thomas. Mr. Thomas is charged with resisting arrest and obstruction of governmental administration. It's like you know, it's kind of some, I don't know, it's an obstruction of justice, kind of a bogus charge. What they said was that he had, they tried to give him a ticket for something, and he tried to swallow it like golf ball size piece of like crack cocaine. Then he like fled, and they, when you've seen the videos, I'll tell you this, you see this video, because when I met him, he's like, there's a video of these police beating me up. And this is, he introduced me to the guy who took the video, and the video's on YouTube. And it's him, he's in the, it's the exact same street corner where Mr. Garner was killed. And it's 5 days before Mr. Garner was killed. And Mr. Thomas is on the ground while these two, there's one cop kind of like right on his back, and then there's this just giant white cop. And Mr. Thomas is black, and there's just a giant, he's just wailing away on Mr. Thomas's legs, saying, you know, stop resisting, which is just Kafka-esque in its absurdity. But, and just for, you know, what it's worth. You know, he went to parole and tested totally negative for crack cocaine. So I mean, there was no, he didn't swallow any crack. In any case, I mean, that video was shot in the exact same location. I mean, it was like 2 storefronts down from where Mr. Garner was killed. It was actually shot by the same person. This young man named Ramsey Orton, who took Mr. Garner's video. So I actually met Ramsey a couple of days before, so he showed me the video. And then that video had actually gotten a little press, and then, you know, several days later, Mr. Garner's video happened. Everyone's just wondering what the heck is going on in Staten Island. And I think to understand these questions, that this and Ferguson and the other killings that have happened since then, and before that for that matter, I will say that I think to understand exactly what was going on in these videos, you have to understand a little bit about Staten Island. Staten Island is, as you probably know, it's one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. You got Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, Bronx, and Staten Island. It's the smallest borough. It's the most, I guess you call, suburban borough. It's the whitest borough, and it's the most conservative borough. There's a joke after the non-indictment of Officer Pantaleo came out. They joked on SNL, they're like, well, why'd you expect an indictment? Staten Island's 80% white and 90% cops, which is like not that far off. It's a lot of cops, it's a lot of city workers, cops, firemen, sanitation guys, and it's very, very conservative, relative to Brooklyn, the Bronx, the other boroughs. But there's a small, mainly poor, and predominantly black section of Staten Island, the North Shore. The North Shore is it's where the ferry comes in, so it's kind of the connection of the rest of the city. It's where the courts are, it's where the 120 precinct, which has kind of been the subject of these issues, it's where the 120 precinct is, where my offices are, it's where the public housing projects are. And it's a very heavily policed area. Another factor that I think is just, another thing that factors in is there's also some development going on around the North Shore. They're trying to put in really have put in a number of kind of luxury high rises, trying to lure the jet set Manhattan type, saying it's, you know, cheaper than Brooklyn, but still close to the city, whatever. So it's a tense area, and particularly, I'll tell you, the area where Mr. Garner and Mr. Thomas were both attacked. It's a place called Tompkinsville Park. It's a small, like, sliver of grass, right, it's like, I don't know, 10 minutes from the ferry. And I mean, the only thing I can really say about it is if you talk about like marginalized communities, look, if you're poor and maybe you got a criminal record and you don't really have any space of your own, look, you're probably you might, on a nice July day, you might find yourself going to Tompkinsville Park. You're gonna have a cigarette, talk to some people, play some chess, drink a beer, and like that's kind of the area where you're gonna do it. But of course, in an area that's heavily policed, that's gonna be the target. Well, there's another problem with the fact that these areas are heavily policed, and it's that the precinct that's doing the policing, the 120 precinct, actually features a number of what we call bad cops. What I mean by that is this. I know, as I understand it, you guys have a police accountability clinic here, so some of you guys may be familiar with this. Cops don't beat somebody up, you might get sued, you know, they might get sued over it. And so there's going to be some record of these lawsuits containing allegations, and then some record of a settlement. Now, there's not going to be finding of fact, but you're going to see certain officers named over and over again. And certain officers are associated with some very high settlement amounts. You know, whatever, you see a case that settles for like $7,500, you're like, I don't know, maybe nothing really happened. You see a case that settles for $200,000, you start thinking, okay, this guy really hurt somebody. And the Daily News, a publication in New York, did an article recently, this was actually probably about a year ago now, it was before Mr. Garner got killed. It said, like 7 of the top 10 or top 12 of these most sued police officers are operating out of the 120 precinct. So you have this in Staten Island, you have this very heavily targeted, small but very heavily targeted area targeted by some cops who got some problems. But there also is, so that's the Staten Island portion, but there is also, I think, a larger issue with police violence. And this is something that was talked about in the lecture, obviously, earlier today. And, look, there's a lot to be said about it. One thing I'm going to touch on is, one of the concerns is that among police officers, and look, I'm not a cop, never been a cop. I'm outside looking in on this. But I think there's a concern that there's an entitlement to use a certain degree of violence, but more than is legally permissible. What I mean by that is this: after the non-indictment came out, just by way of example, there was an office mate of mine had a conversation with one of the corrections officers in court. So the corrections officers they're not PD, it's a separate department, but they similar function, and they work down in the cells where the guys come in when they get arrested. He got into an argument with the guy, why? Like, it's not, why waste your time? But the guy said, these are not like terrible cops that you would think are, really aggressive guys. And the corrections guys we usually get along with, but he said, you should have gotten indicted. We're allowed to do that. It's like, no, you're not. At least, maybe DOC is different, but like, police department's not allowed to do that. There's a rule saying, there's a rule 20 years ago, internal departmental guidelines saying no chokeholds. And they define chokehold broadly. No pressing down on the windpipe because you might kill somebody. And so that's been the rule for about 20 years. But it wasn't just the CO who said it. And again, I'm not even saying he in particular was a bad guy. But it was a lot of other people came out, like the union, the patrolmen's union, Pat Lynch came out and said, some of you may have heard about Pat Lynch, but he came out and he's like, that's not it's a wrestling move, it's a takedown thing, it's something he was taught in the academy. It's like, all right, maybe it was, but he shouldn't have been. That's not allowed. But there was there's this, Pantaleo's lawyer came out and said the same thing. That, this is allowed. You're allowed to do this. And the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is supposed to be an independent oversight agency that looks at examples of police abuse, they were like, over 1,000 in the past however many years. People complaining about this, saying I was arrested, I was put into a chokehold, I felt like I was going to die. So there's some sort of disconnect between what the rules are on police violence and what internally officers believe they're entitled to do. It's similar to, look, again, if any ever had any experience in the system, like working with public defender's officer or whatever, it's like there's this unwritten rule. If you ever get arrested, if you run, you're getting beaten. And it's not, this is something that was told to me by senior lawyers. It's something I've certainly seen with clients who come in and were like, I tried to get away, and they threw me a good beating. It was even something I heard by somebody who was in the system on the other side, somebody who's on the enforcement side, was like, his brother got beat up by a cop. He confronted the cop about it. He's like, what'd you do this to my brother for? He's like, I didn't know. But he shouldn't have run. I kind of had to tool him up a little bit. It's like, what? Like that's I know it's an anecdotal example. But what I've seen, again, just from my limited experience, is that you're dealing with what could be a very deeply ingrained culture of violence. And it's okay to be a little bit violent. And part of the problem is, which is, again, this is something we absolutely talked about today, there's no accountability. And I think that's what brings us to the non-indictment. As you guys all know, this is why you're here. They didn't indict Dana Pantaleo on anything for killing Mr. Garner. And the question is, why not? Well, you have to take a look at well, just as a quick refresher, the grand juries, you guys probably all know. The idea is it's supposed to kick out, baseless cases before you actually put somebody on trial for their liberty for a felony. And so it's the province of the prosecutor puts on the evidence. It's supposed to be kind of a neutral party, like not too adversarial. But, you know, it doesn't always play out that way. The standard is just probable cause. It's just to be like, look, is there a good enough reason to think we're actually going to, it's the same standard for arresting somebody, basically. Like, is there just enough evidence? And so in this case, that's all that was that's all they're really trying to look for. So probable cause to believe that Officer Pantaleo, I mean, really the charges that they would be talking about were manslaughter, which would be like a reckless mens rea, or just criminally negligent homicide, which is just talking about negligence. No one was really talking about intentional murder. Unfortunately, well, I mean, what's generally fortunate is that grand jury documents are sealed. It's unfortunate in this case because it looks like something really may have gone wrong. We only have very limited information about what actually went on in the grand jury. I will say that, you know, full disclosure, the legal aid society that I work for is trying to we're filing a motion to see if we can get those grand jury minutes opened up to find out actually how this case was presented, and there are a number of other organizations doing the same thing. But we only have very limited information. Here's what we do know. What we do know is that the grand jury the DA's office presented 50 witnesses, 50 witnesses to this case. They presented 22 civilian witnesses, which means they presented 28 law enforcement or medical witnesses. I don't know if you guys have a sense, that's a staggering number. I mean, this is basically how it went with Ferguson too. It's just a shocking number of witnesses compared to how you normally prosecute a case. The way these DA's offices, I mean, you're normally not like, normally a DA's office is going to present a very narrow view of, try to get it in with, because again, you're not trying to make the grand jury proceeding seem like more than it really is. They're just like, hey, we got this evidence. You know, we'll figure it out at trial, but you guys should probably just indict. Like, that's kind of the general sense of what a grand jury is. Here they put on 50 witnesses. I don't really know what 28 cops had to say about this, but they put them on. We also know they put in something like 60 exhibits too, which we don't know what they were, but it does, again, it just, look, we don't know exactly what happened, but it does seem like a pretty large number of exhibits. And they let Pantaleo testify for 2 hours. So if you're the target of a grand jury investigation, you can serve written notice on the DA to say, I want to testify, and you do have a statutory right to testify. They have to let you. They don't have to let you testify for 2 hours, and they don't have to let you narrate 3 videos, which is what his lawyer said that he did, that he actually was able to go through and try to give his interpretation of what he was doing on these videos in which Mr. Garner's getting killed. So, look, I mean, obviously I think you guys probably all know what I think happened in the grand jury. I mean, fundamentally, we don't know yet because we don't have the minutes. But looking at this, it's like something went wrong. They were, I mean, look, I'm not going to say that somebody intentionally threw it because I don't know who was involved. We don't even know who the lawyers were involved. We don't know if they like really intentionally were trying to get what we call a no true bill, which is a non-indictment. We don't know if they were doing that on purpose. I suspect maybe it was a political compromise. Some people were really, you know, like we're going to really go after in the grand jury, but we are going to give them what you. But we're going to give them like a lot, we're going to put everything in. So it's kind of a compromise. We're going to give them kind of the best chance, but maybe we're like, you know, we're not going to totally throw it out. But we have no idea. This is speculation on our part. We just don't know until, if we ever get to see the grand jury minutes. But it's certainly very concerning. Look, it's concerning when you see a guy get caught on camera and the cop doesn't get away. That's concerning. And so there are a lot of I think there are a lot of great proposals that the professor spoke about today for how to reform this process so that you don't get cases that, you know, the grand jury result is so at odds with what everybody saw. And one of them would be a special prosecutor. And I'm just going to say this. The case for a special prosecutor is that the local prosecutor's office is simply too closely entwined with the police department. And they're entwined on like 3 different levels. They're related professionally just because, you know, if they're going after search warrants or wiretaps, it's a whole department of investigations in the DA's office that works hand in hand with the police to actually investigate cases. They have, whenever they're prosecuting cases, they're prosecuting them on the words of these very police officers. Particularly when you're dealing with such a small borough. I mean, they literally prosecuted cases based on what they would say was the honesty and judgment of this very officer they're now supposed to be prosecuting. There are also political connections. The DA is an elected office, and you're in a very pro-police borough. So there's probably, I mean, you could just see how the temptation would be not to go after the cops too hard. Never mind the fact that in New York City, and probably a lot of other places, the police union is just a very powerful political lobby. And lastly, though, there's a personal connection between the DA's office and the prosecutor's office. Again, particularly in a small place like Staten Island. You're gonna have DAs who are married to cops. You're gonna have DAs who are related to cops. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise. I don't think it's any secret that there's a seasoned, or rather, a senior prosecutor in the DA's office whose brother is very high up in the detectives union. You're just gonna have a lot of those relationships. And again, I'll be very clear, I'm not saying that any particular DA was involved in any particular DA intended to throw something. I mean, I don't have any reason to say that. I don't have it. We don't know what happened. But man, it does seem like it's going to create a particular conflict of interest. And I'll tell you, this is the last thing, and then we can do questions. I mean, I saw this kind of conflict in the day it came out. I was in court. I was waiting for a hearing or something, and we knew the grand jury that it was going to be coming out that day, because everyone was talking about how they were closing court early. I guess basically they're saying they're going to close for protests, and I think that should have been our first sign that this is not going to go our way. But I'm sitting there, it's a couple of people, court officers, a judge, and a DA, and they're talking, and the DA says, I'd be shocked if he doesn't get indicted, but I don't think he should. And she followed it up with, he's just a really good kid, comes from a great family, just the sweetest kid. And I was still surprised, even with all that leading up. And by the way, this was not a DA who was, to my knowledge, she wasn't involved in prosecution. And I will also point out that, I've spoken with a lot of other DAs who were, very much in favor of an indictment. So I'm not, I don't know what actually happened with this case, but I'm not going to act like it's not that all the DAs thought that this guy should walk. It wasn't that. But looking back, I was shocked when it came out. I really was. God, I just didn't. Ferguson, you're like, it's not good what happened. It's pretty shocking what happened there, but you're kind of like conflicting witness testimony. I don't know. But this one was a video. So I just didn't see how this one. Ferguson was surprising. I didn't see how this one would go. But looking back, I really should have. Because I think contained in that statement, again, it's for DA who wasn't really even involved, but I think contained in that statement is, to me, I think it's the root of the issue. And the issue is this. When you, the DA, the white DA, and as a matter of fact, I believe it's the majority. You do not have very many attorneys of color in the DA's office. Actually, to my knowledge, I don't think they have any black attorneys in the DA's office in Staten Island. I don't know if everybody in the felony bureau, but definitely down in criminal court bill. So if it's like you, the white DA, look at white cop defendant, what you see is somebody you know, and you see somebody who's from where you're from, and very literally is from the same section of Staten Island you're from. Maybe again, I don't know who the DA's were. And you see that person, you know that guy's mother, and you talk to that guy socially, he's from where you're from, and you see the good in him, and you see what's worth saving. And you see automatically all the stuff that me, as a defender, that I'm trying to get you to see about my client. Because you don't look like him. And you're not from where he's from. And so when you look at him, you don't see all the stuff that's worth seeing. You see the things he's done wrong or the things you think he's done wrong. And look, I'm not going to put this all in the DA's either. And I'm not saying, and I'm not going to say that these things are necessarily even, overt, or explicit. I'm saying that in the criminal justice system, everybody's got to watch for these biases, because I think we all have them. Someone's off, I don't know, I mean, it's not just the DAs, but it's the DAs and the cops and the judges and the defense attorneys. But if we don't grapple with that, if we don't find a way to see past the differences in the people that the people whose lives are in our hands in the justice system, if we don't do that, then we're not going to have justice in the system. We're just going to have more error carnage. Thank you.
So now we'll open it up for questions. Anybody have-
Yeah, my question, I have a question and a comment. My question is, did Mr. Garner commit suicide? Because the medical examiner, as I understood it, said there was a homicide. And no one's been arrested. So you have a man dead, you have a man on film with his hand around his neck, and there's no indictment. My comment is that I think the police department in New York and perhaps in other places, they're out of control. Just this week, the Commissioner of Police in New York announced the formation of another unit that, in response to Black Matters, Black Lives Matters, that this unit will be monitoring protests, and they will be armed with machine guns. What are you gonna do with a machine gun in an urban city?
So you're absolutely correct, and I appreciate you saying that, because that was the reason. They came out basically announcing, for those of you who didn't know, they came out announcing that, they said it's like part terrorism, part peaceful protest, that they're now going to be arming people, which, how do you equate those two? Especially, and it's especially outrageous in New York, where, we've legally decided there's been a lot of protests in New York, and every single one of them has been peaceful. So it's outrageous, I completely agree, it's outrageous that they actually need to be arming them with military-style weapons in order to combat what? The peaceful protesters? It's absurd. And the fact is, you're absolutely right. This was ruled a homicide. It was ruled that, look, I assume, it seems like this is probably a somewhat friendly audience here, but there are people who try to say with this Garner thing that no, it was his weight, it was his asthma, whatever it was, that's what led to his death. It's like, no, it's not.
It's the medical examiner.
Exactly. He got killed because he got choked, and nobody did anything. And I will say, an interesting thing you brought up is that nobody got arrested. See, that's another difference between how this proceeds and how it proceeds with my clients. Because with my clients, you can get arrested before an indictment. You don't need an indictment to arrest somebody. My clients, they get arrested, they get held in on bail, and then the DA tries to squeeze a plea out of us before going to an indictment. Because once you go to an indictment, it changes the whole plea negotiations. There's like restrictions on what they can do. So they're like, we'll give your guy a misdemeanor in a year, but he's got to plead today. And so they have that leverage on clients. They don't use that for him. This cop doesn't get arrested. It's yet another difference between what happened, the way they proceed with this police officer and the way they proceed with everybody else in the system. Yes?
How do you get out of this conversation of bad apples, of individual bad cops? Because I know you mentioned there's a couple of cops that are like really bad. How do you have a public discourse around the entire system of police brutality of a police state and stop having the conversation around individual cops that you need insight boards to control? Like, how do you get out of that conversation?
Man, I wish I knew. Like, I know that's no joke. When I referenced a couple of bad cops, I actually really do mean it's a systemic thing. And I think that, how do you do it? Because that's what they're going to say. It's a couple of bad guys. All right, I'll tell you one thing we are trying to do. And it's kind of a pet project in my office in Staten Island, where we're trying to get at police personnel files. And so this is the thing. Is there discipline for police officers when they do these things? Maybe. Maybe there's some internal stuff that we never hear about. I have no idea what goes on. And certainly, as we all know, you get like my client with like 3 grams of crack cocaine and he's a drug addict, you want him to be a felon and go to jail and take probation or whatever. But cop does something, and these records are sealed. He has no record of it, he doesn't go to prison for it. So what we try to do is we try to subpoena the records. We try to say, look, this guy's been sued like 1,000 times. We want to find out what's in his record. So it's kind of a new initiative, and it hasn't really borne fruit yet. But what we're hoping to do is be able to get records on some individual police officers and then show how it's things are happening with the same teams or a number of teams. Maybe that's it. Maybe you just got to try to find a way to actually, maybe that's what it is. I mean, if you actually expose what's really going on, because it's the blue wall of silence, right? And then they work very hard to try to say, like, no, you're not going to see these records. But our hope and our suspicion is that if we actually get to see what's going on internally, that it's going to expose that it's not just one or two cops who gets caught on camera, but it's a whole team of these guys going out nightly and hurt people and locking people up for no reason. So, I mean, again, I don't have like a great answer for it. I think it's a really good question. But that's what we're trying anyways.
I guess I'm curious about how, when you have clients coming to you and saying, like, the police beat me up, is there any sort of mechanism for them to get representation for affirmative suit against a police officer? Because I'm assuming as a public defender, you can't really do
Okay,
that.
yeah, exactly. So we don't do those kinds of cases. There are a couple of things we can do. One is basically tell them to get a civil lawyer. A number of civil lawyers, it gets tricky. We're not supposed to give referrals, and so we don't really give referrals. But we say, look, contact somebody who handles this kind of stuff because you may have a lawsuit. There's also this, what is it? I don't remember the name. There's a form you got to fill out if you want to sue them in state court. If you want to sue the city in state court, you got to do it within 90 days. We'll try to help the client with that if we can, or at least urge them to get moving because these things do happen. Or we'll try to meet with them with the Civilian Complaint Review Board, or even, and I did this in the case of my client, Mr. Thomas, we'll meet with IAB. I mean, there are internal affairs investigators. I mean, I'm sure some are better than others. I don't really know. But we'll try to help them at least navigate the process. Again, we can't represent them, and we can't really refer them to somebody specifically, but we'll at least try to let them know, like, look, you may have something here, and you want to act on it quickly, and we'll help you whatever way we can. Yes?
So I remember, I guess, the aftermath of the Garner non-indictment and then the protests and some of the statements that Mr. Lynch made and other people in the police union. And I thought they were kind of outrageous because, I mean, I didn't really hear the entirety of the remarks of like Mayor de Blasio or President Obama or Holder or whoever else, but whatever I heard seemed pretty tame and very mild. Like I didn't hear any anti-police rhetoric or anything like that. I mean, that's unthinkable. And yet when I heard Mr. Lynch, it's almost as if he was talking about something completely different, like from another planet. And I'm curious, like, is that sentiment really widely shared in the police force, or is this some militant union leadership that's like off the wall and sort of out on a limb?
Again, that's another really good question. I don't really know the answer. So again, Pat Lynch is the head of the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, which is it's the union for patrol cops. And he just has some, he's just so far off to the side on this thing that it's like he says these things that are just, I don't know, crazy. And again, it's the kind of thing you might hear on an extreme on either side of a political thing where you're like it's not really participating in serious discourse. And yet he's responding to what are, again, I would say, coming from my political perspective, like very reasonable approaches. Nobody in the administration, in de Blasio's administration or Obama's administration, is bashing cops. It's just not happening. Especially, I think, for a liberal politician, that's the third rail. You know what I mean? They'll say, they're probably even going further than maybe they're comfortable with, because then they get this crazy response. In terms of whether that sentiment is shared among police generally, I can't say. I just don't know. It's like a 43,000 member department or something like that. And I will say it's a mix of cops. I will say that we actually, certainly not everybody agrees with that. There's an investigator in my office who's a former police officer. We've had a number of investigators who, they'll do their 20 years and then come work for us. And the ones we have had, at least the ones in my experience, like you know, they're cops. They got their job, they did their thing, and they believe in the job, whatever. But they're not like they don't buy into that. So I'll certainly say that I've met several very good former police officers who do not buy into that rhetoric. Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
On this conversation of data, there's also a conversation around police cams. Like, how helpful is more data and like videotapes and cameras when even when we get them, these things continue to happen? Like, how helpful is this conversation about getting more data when, for decades, scholars have shown that a police state exists, that a militarized police exists, that these deaths have been happening? I just don't understand kind of what more data does for our consciousness. What
I
does it
think
do?
when you're saying more data, you're talking about video games, right? That's
I mean, not
what
even
really-
that, but also like the court, getting these court cases, getting more indications of like. So you're saying I don't know what happened, right, in the grand jury situation,
Yeah.
but you're extrapolating
Sure.
based on what happened. So I'm saying a lot of people feel like they don't need that extrapolation. They know what's happening, and it's been happening for a long time. So what does more data actually do to like change the state of affair?
It's another interesting question. Well, all right, a couple of things. One is this. As much as public defenders, many public defenders consider themselves activists, that we're working for broader social reforms, we're also at heart purely criminal defense. We're criminal defense lawyers. And I'll say that having this kind of data on the criminal defense end can be very, very helpful. Because even if it's like, take my client, Mr. Thomas, who's beat up by these police officers. I mean, he's still, I'm going back to court on Friday. I'm not going to get into exact like negotiations or stuff like that, but this cop's never going to go to trial. The cop is never going to get arrested for assault. That's not going to happen. But it's going to help the criminal case. So there is that. Data does help, at least in the criminal case. And when you're dealing with, if your goal is to say, we're trying to get the people who are being thrown into the system, we're trying to keep them out of the system, there is help for at least that. I would also say that, look, there's a lot of well-intentioned liberal folks who are actually wouldn't necessarily doubt the police, would take the very typical police are doing a good job and da-da-da-da-da, whatever. And I think that these videos, you're right, he didn't get indicted. And neither did Darren Wilson. But the conversation's definitely shifted in our country. I'm not going to act like this is taking care of everything. I'm not going to act like it's, things are all of a sudden better. They're not. But more information, it's not hurting. Let's put it that way. So, I share your concerns that, what's a body camera going to do when this guy doesn't get indicted and it's right on camera? I definitely share those concerns.
And the reason why I say this is because even studies about body cameras reveal that police officers turn them on and off using their own discretion. The problem seems to be police officers, the police state, and the amount of discretion police officers have when they engage in their police work. So I'm just wondering about what more data that shows what these people are doing how is that going to help? Your responses have given some light to that.
Yeah, and it's none of it's going to be a perfect solution at this point. There's always going to be some problems. But yeah, sure.
So I feel like we're talking a lot about the police's role in this, but I also feel like there's a role that needs to be said about the judicial, or how the justice is working, because by non-indicting, aren't you putting a legal stamp at saying this is okay? You're essentially putting a legal stamp and saying it's okay to use excessive force because we're not going to indict you. So aren't you perpetuating a culture of, you were talking about how police feel like they have the entitlement to use excess force. So where does this entitlement come from? Does it not come from these non-indictments, this ability of the judicial to actually change something, but then still voting not to?
I absolutely agree. I think that's exactly what's concerning about these non-indictments. Okay, side note. Cases like this put criminal defense lawyers oftentimes in a very difficult, make strange bedfellows, let's put it that way. We're not typically rooting for indictments, we're usually rooting for non-indictments. But I think that when we see an example like this, we're look, I don't like anybody going to jail. I don't like anybody getting branded a criminal, not even generally. But man, if you're gonna brand people a criminal and you're gonna put people in jail, how are you not gonna put that guy in jail? And so that, you're absolutely right. Like the whole system, I think, is the whole system. I don't want to paint too broad a brush, but I mean, yeah, there's a problem when it's like right now, it's like, yeah, you get to do that. If you want to, you get to do it on camera now. That's essentially the message that's being sent. So it's problematic. I mean, look, who knows? Maybe they really did give it the bite. Look, there is another side to it. I don't really think this is what happened. But as a defense lawyer, I'll tell you, like, we have clients who go into the grand jury and they're like stone cold guilty, and they blow it out of the grand jury, as we say. It's like they, for whatever, it does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't ever happen. I don't know why I brought that up. That's probably not what happened here. Yes.
Sorry. So you talked about when you talked about what you thought the issue was in summary, and you talked about the DA as a white man, relating more to the police officer than Eric Garner. And just on a broader scale, with relation to that, what are your thoughts about race-based training for either the jury or even the prosecution or the judge? Is it? I guess my questions are is it permissible? Have you ever used it? And do you think that it's helpful to sort of tap in terms of these are either implicit or very overt biases that you might have, and you have to consider that this is a race issue that you might not be seeing the defendant or whoever it is the same way that you would see someone of another race?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's tricky. I'll talk race with some prosecutors. I think there's some who, but again, the ones I'll talk to about it are the ones who will listen to it. Because otherwise it's not going to be a productive conversation. I'm not going to, if I'm trying to work out a deal, I'm trying to actually advocate for my client. There's certainly times when that is going to be, this is the problem. You have to tailor it to your audience. And so there are certain DAs I'm probably not going to bring up race with because it's not going to work. And I got to try to get the best thing for my client. I think that race-based, any sort of anti-bias training is very, Legal Aid Society, we do anti-bias training. I think it's really important to do because it's something that, I think it's especially important for us as public defenders to be we're not above needing to do this. And so I absolutely think that police officers, judges, DAs, we all need it because it's there's clearly something going wrong in terms of race in the justice system. In terms of, approaching it on a case-by-case basis, I certainly try to bring it up when I can. Yes?
Yeah, I have a problem, we use the term liberal to describe some white people who could look at this guy being choked to death and then think about somebody else being a good kid and whatever. That's real, I think you're being very generous with the term liberal, or what does it really mean? If you can see somebody murdered and not address that, but address the characteristics of the person who's actually doing the murder. In terms of your statement that Pat Lynch or Lynch, whatever, is far out, I don't think he is far out because he made his statements, a while ago. And now you have the mayor of the city and the police commissioner agreeing to respond to black people who are protesting the murder that was seen on video by creating a unit and equating these folks as terrorists. So I don't think Mr. Lynch is that far out. Because at the end of the day, he's not been reprimanded, and the people who are protesting this injustice are being labeled as terrorists. In New York City, which is in the north, we're not talking about Mississippi or South Carolina or Texas. We're talking about supposedly liberal New York City.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to disagree with you on that. It's not, I think I try to be optimistic sometimes about these things, but you're not wrong. I mean, Pat Lynch probably does represent more people than I care to think he does. And actually, going back to the question that was over here about whether the rank and file really support Pat Lynch, there's one thing that I forgot to bring up, and it was, did you guys hear about the slowdown, the NYPD work slowdown? So, some of you did, and what happened was, look, 2 police officers were murdered by a man, and it's awful. It was really tragic. It's a very scary thing to think of happening. the response to that was that the police department, police union politicized that. Catalans declared that they're now a wartime police department, to which somebody very astutely asked, well, if you're declaring war, who are you declaring war on? Yeah, right. But they then decided, there was basically internally, I think it was a union thing, not a management thing on the police side, but they said, well, we're basically work stoppage. You're only going to arrest somebody if you absolutely have to. And of course, that brings up the question, well, what the heck were you doing before? And so, and like it was, well, I don't know, you guys didn't hear about New York City burning to the ground over the course of a couple weeks in December, did you, right? So like nothing bad happened when they didn't do that. But there was obviously support because, I mean, arrests plummeted, which was like a nice break for the public defenders in the system. But like, I mean, there was obviously a lot of support for that. There were a lot of, at the funerals for these officers, I don't know the numbers offhand, but it was a good chunk of these police officers turned their back on the mayor. So I mean, there is some support for this. And to go back to your point, which Mr. Lynch probably speaks for a lot more people than I care to think about. Yes.
So I don't know how to frame this question, so I'm going to kind of ask you to read my mind, but it's a public defender-based question in that, there are public defenders all over the country who are really in the trenches, who one, don't have the pedigree that you or I have, and two, don't have sort of the opportunity to go to law schools and talk about the experiences that they've had with different people that they've represented. So I guess my question is really sort of why did you decide to come here? Why were you willing to come and speak? And sort of, do you find it important that people like us who sort of have the opportunity to do this take advantage of it?
Well, thanks for asking that question. I came because, I was just really honored to be asked. I thought that it was, look, like I said, it is complicated because I'm here because I'm here because of the client. I happen to represent a client and he happened to get killed. That's why I'm here. And at the heart of this entire thing is a tragedy or several tragedies. But one good thing that has come out of this is that a lot more people are talking about it. And if you're going into public defender work, you're gonna find most people don't really, public defenders don't get invited to go talk at a lot of places. But I think it is important to talk about these things. I think that one thing we've been trying to do at work is you gotta strike while the iron's hot. And if this is something people care about, you gotta start making moves on it. You gotta try to bring this up and you have to talk about it, you have to write about it, and you have to engage people while they're willing to engage. Because you know what, at some point, hopefully not, but at some point people are probably gonna forget about it. People are gonna move on to whatever the next thing is. And so yeah, if people wanna listen, I'm certainly willing to talk.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you guys for coming out and thank you for coming to speak with us.
Thank you all very much.